African history. Development of modern transport systems in Africa. Development of modern transport systems in Africa. The development of transport system was one of the important colonial policies. Roads, railways, ports and harbours were put in place irrespective of whether the colonial power was Britain, France, German, Portugal, Italy or otherwise. There have been a number of professed reasons as to why such transport systems were developed. By 1914, many transport systems had been developed in West, South, Central and East Africa. Most of the professed motives had been achieved, but besides this, massive African resources had been sucked through the transport systems to benefit Europe. Africa also benefited, but to a negligible extent. Factors that determine the introduction and development of modern transport and communication networks/systems. A number of factors can be identified to explain modern systems of transport and communication were introduced and development in Africa. This system included railway lines, steamers where navigable water bodies existed, harbours and ports, towns/urban centres, telegraph lines. Among the reasons included the economic prospects that existed in an area were key to development of school systems. The desire to exploit these economic potentials forced the colonialists to invest heavily in such modern transport facilities. Areas that had sound agricultural potential found themselves attracting the development of railway lines, and the same was true for the naturally endowed places with minerals like in Southern Africa, Cape Town, Kimberley, Natal Complex, Kona-Sekondi, Kumasi Line, the Uganda Railway, the Tanganyika Central Line, and Cameroon lines took on the names Cocoa Line, Cotton Line, suggesting that they were intended to exploit the same. The other reason was the presence of chartered companies and missionaries often stimulated the development of these systems as the missionaries and traders strived to open up new areas for trade and new areas for evangelization. Roads were set up like the missionary road that connected Nyasaland to the southerly tip of Lake Tanganyika in Central Africa. The steamship service along Lake Nyasa that belonged to the African Lakes Company, the presence of the Royal Niger Company in Nigeria, stimulated the development of Lagos Harbour and the steamship service in the Niger Delta region, while the concessionaire companies in the Congo, i.e. Compagnie du Congo, Compagnie du Katanga, stimulated the development of the railway lines in the Katanga region and the steamship services along the navigable stretches on the Kondo River. Another reason was the presence of the well-organized African states, societies or communities. The development of such networks was sometimes championed and encouraged by the local leadership, many of whom were termed as progressive and modernizers who longed to their society's development of a modern African history. Development of modern transport systems in Africa. Some areas were opened up to create markets for the European manufactured goods. It should be noted that many parts of Africa were landlocked and inaccessible, and so in order to open up the interior and create viable markets for European goods, it was important that such modern Africa with infrastructures were set up. Some areas were of strategic importance to the colonies and therefore of government importance in their survival in the economic arena. This partly explains the reasons for the construction of the Suez Canal and the enlargement of Port Alexandria. The Kenya-Uganda Railway. The name Kenya-Uganda Railway referred to the railway that was constructed from Mombasa to Port Florence, Kisumu. It was called so because till 1902 the land to almost 50 miles to the west of Nairobi was in Uganda, and moreover British main interests then lay in Uganda. A survey to establish the feasibility of this line had been carried out as early as 1892 by Captain MacDonald, and its cost estimated at £20 million. However, this cost was enormous for the Imperial British East African Company (ABICO), which made the plan to be shelved for some time. Moreover, the Liberal government under Gladstone that came to power in Britain in 1892 was opposed to the idea of constructing the railway, considering it the lunatic line. It was not until the come of Lord Salisbury's Conservatives to power that the construction of the railway was sanctioned. Work started at Mombasa on 30th May 1896. The line reached Kisumu on the 20th December 1901. In 1902 the line was officially opened. The Jinyu-Namasagali line was opened in 1912. Reasons for the construction of the Uganda Railway. The probable reasons for its construction are debatable. Tidy and Leeming 1988 assert that the reasons for building them were mainly political. On the contrary, the popular belief is that the railway was to enable the smooth economic exploitation of the Uganda Protectorate. The reasons suggested include the following. The need to open up Uganda for resource exploitation. It was believed that Uganda had a resource potential, and the railway, once constructed, would provide cheap and quick transport even for bulky products. In this way, it was alleged that there would occur the economic development of the Protectorate. The strategic factor. Britain had strategic interests, and the railway was to serve as a strategic link between Egypt and the East African coast. Moreover, if British interests in Egypt were to be secure, then the railway was necessary to enhance a firm grip over Uganda, the source of the Nile waters. Besides, the line was to be used against the Belgians in the Congo in case of an attack. On the surface, these arguments seem convincing. But what ought to be noted is that neither Uganda nor Egypt nor Belgium, Congo were devoid of economic resources that Europe badly needed at that time. Administrative reason, it was also claimed that the railway was to ease the administration of Uganda, which it was to link up, in Kenya, which it was to pass through. In 1893, Gerald Portal had declared a protectorate over Uganda, and now it was necessary to effect the administrative control and development of resources. Administrators and troops to establish peace would be quickly moved in to silence nationalistic groups such as the Nandi, the Maasai and the Banyoro, but why was there resistance? African history development of modern transport systems in Africa. Of 1884 and 85 had varying motives, including economic ones. It is therefore naive to believe that the railway could have been a result of this view. The humanitarian view. Lord Salisbury was able to elicit public as well as parliamentary support to build the railway by appealing to the anti-slavery sentiment. It was believed that the railway would help to stop the inhuman slave trade and slavery, and in return facilitate the development of legitimate commerce. But of course, slave trade had lost economic value in Europe at this time. The Church Missionary Society was able to expand from Rabbi Empire into other areas like Kikuyu, Yao, etc. It is also suggested that there was built to ease the evangelization and Christianization of the East African interior, particularly Uganda. It would serve the moving in of evangelists and reinforcements. What we ought to remember, however, is that the so-called Sons of God also got involved in other activities outside Christianity. The case of Uganda sheds light on this claim. That was needed to make the British colonies self-reliant so as to enable them pay their own administration that was so costly. The Uganda experience, for example, had thrown the Ibeka into a financial abyss, and therefore it was high time that the situation was rectified, hence the construction of the Uganda Railway. Problems encountered in the construction. Diseases. The railway workers suffered disease attacks that ranged from malaria, sleeping sickness, and smallpox. Jiggers caused a lot of suffering and misery, particularly to the Indian coolies. Consequently, the numbers of workers reduced due to deaths, at times the feet were amputated due to the jigger effect. Labour shortage. In the beginning, it was expected that Africans would be a source of labour for the railway construction. But this was a miscalculation. Africans were suspicious of a whole project in the whites. The Nandi referred to them as devils. They did not understand the motive of the railway construction. Pastoral tribes of Kenya, such as the Maasai and Nika, preferred their way of life. Consequently, the labour problem had to be solved by importing Indian coolies to provide the skilled labour and unskilled service in a new and unfamiliar environment. Financial constraints. The construction of the railway should have started earlier than 1896, but the Ibeka could not pay for the cost. The construction of the line to Kisugu had cost the British £8 million, a figure that was 4 times what MacDonald had estimated in 1892. This showed that the cost was far much higher than the original estimates. Naturally, this had to be problematic. Physical status/obstacles. This included the dry waterless Nika Plateau that posed a problem of water shortages. African history development of modern transport systems in Africa. Uncooperative African societies. These included the Maasai and Nandi. The most pronounced hostility, however, came from the latter. Recalling Orkoyo Kiminyo's prophecy about the big snake, the Nandi became increasingly suspicious of the railway passing through the area. They refused to supply water and food to the railway workers. Besides, they staged a resistance, raiding railway camps, killing workers, looting construction materials, cutting telegraphic wires, and destroying the railway construction. Effects of the Uganda Railway. First, the entire area through which the railway passed was brought under one administration, that is the British East African Protectorate. Thus, the original border of the Uganda Protectorate, following a decision to do so in 1902. Therefore, the present-day Kenya-Uganda border came into being, basing on the illogical argument that leaving the railway administration to dual administration of Uganda and Kenya could not make good financial sense. In this way, the eastern province of Uganda was transferred to Kenya. Important to note was the reduction in transport costs compared to human transport involvement became more reliable and faster. Uganda was availed a quick link to the outside world. Therefore, the railway cheapened and quickened the exploitation of African resources. By attracting various European groups, i.e. the missionary adventurers and Indian traders, the building of the railway increased their settlement inland. It should be recalled that the railway created new commercial opportunities that could have acted as a pulling factor. Consequently, this led to urbanization. Nairobi, that started as a supply base for the railway workers, Kisumu, Naivasha, and Jinja all grew with the attendant problems and benefits of urbanization. In the field of administration, the railway made it faster and easier to move in European administrators and troops to the interior. This enabled effective administration of Kenya and Uganda. In effect, there was effective colonization and occupation of Uganda and Kenya by the British. Reduction in the administrative costs. It confirmed Kenya as a settler economy. Charles Elliot, the commissioner of the AP, once remarked that the country Kenya had grown from a consular district into a colony. Several white settlers were attracted to the Kenyan highlands following the construction. Consequently, African land was alienated, which aspect caused a lot of untold misery to the African population. It also facilitated the stopping of slave trade and slavery in a British protectorate as slave trade became unviable. The line served to transport goods that fueled the development of unequal legitimate commerce. The railway also helped to enhance the exploitation of the agricultural potential of Kenya and Uganda, i.e. that Jinja-Masigali line in Busoga that was exported. Others like coffee. African history development of modern transport systems in Africa. The work of missionaries was also promoted. This consequently led to increased evangelization and civilization of the British domains in East Africa. The work of missionaries was also promoted. This consequently led to increased evangelization and civilization of the British domains in East Africa. The impacts of the Uganda Railway were thus many and were political, economic, social and religious. Nevertheless, the economic potentials of East Africa were sucked due to this important development. The benefits could have been for Africans as well, but it is doubted whether they were intended. QN. To what extent were the results of the construction of the Uganda Railway economic?